Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're in the kitchen again, but we're not baking. That's because someone asked me if I could make a video about what I think are the basic supplies you need to bake a lot of breads. So I thought I should do that because I use a lot of different things. Sometimes you see them in the video, sometimes you don't. And I thought I would just take a few minutes to talk about them and give you some advice on what you should get. So if you're just going to make the occasional loaf of white bread, you don't really need anything. You can just use whatever you have laying around the house, a measuring cup or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's fine. But if you're going to bake a lot of bread like I do, I bake so much bread it actually gets a little insane. If you're going to bake a lot, you might want to think about investing in a few specific tools. So one of my absolute favorite things, you see it in pretty much, I think, every video so far you have seen this mat. This is my silicone baking mat. I adore this and I highly recommend you get one too. If you are going to get one, you want to get one that has these circles with your inches and your centimeters. I'm Canadian, so we use a lot of centimeters, but it also helps to have inches because you never know what you're going to need. So you want to get one that has both gradients if you are able to do so. So I have the circles with inches and centimeters. I have inches across the top here, and I inches down the side, and centimeters down here and up this side. So I have both my centimeters and my inches both in my circles and my sides. That's really important. So if I'm rolling out a piece of dough and I want it to be 12 by 15 inches, I can do 12 by 15 inches. Okay, because I have all my measurements. I also like that it has my measurement conversions here. So it'll go from cups to ounces, tablespoons, teaspoons, and milliliters, because we do use that a lot in Canada. We use a lot of milliliters. So it has a little conversion table. So if I'm looking at something, I can quickly figure out what my equivalents are. And it has my temperature conversion charts. So I know that 375 degrees Fahrenheit is 190 degrees Celsius. I also know that because off the top of my head, simply because I use a lot of both American and European cookbooks. And American cookbooks give temps in Fahrenheit, and European cookbooks give them in Celsius. So I already know a lot of these, but it's really handy to have that conversion chart. That way you can buy a cookbook from an area you don't live in that uses a different temperature scale, and you have a quick reference for what is what. This is also 100% silicone. You do want to get 100% silicone mat. It is dishwasher safe. You can't light it on fire and you shouldn't cut on it. And you can't put it in the oven because it can't handle about more than 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which it never will. I can put a fairly warm pan right on it out of the oven. I just can't put this in the oven. You would have no reason to do that. It can go in the freezer, because this mat can handle up to 40 below. 40 below is the same in both Celsius and Fahrenheit. So this can handle a very, very cold temperature. So you can put this in the freezer. You just can't put it in your oven. So that's my first thing that I would tell people to get, your silicone mat. All of them. Something else you see in a lot of videos are these nesting bowls, these little mixing bowls. I love these. You see them a lot because you'll see me measure 2 to 3 cups of flour in this one, a good cup of flour in that. You'll see me put oats or wheat germ in this one. Get yourself a set of nesting bowls. One is missing right now because it's got sourdough starter in it and it's in a cupboard, but usually there are actually 6 of them, not 5. But get yourself a nice set of nesting bowls. They should be plastic. You don't want to use metal. Some of your starters, like your sourdough starter or your bigas for your ciabatta, should not be in metal bowls. So you do want to use a plastic or a ceramic. Plastic is much lighter, so I like plastic bowls. Just make sure they are indeed dishwasher safe, because that's important, because everybody wants to put them in the dishwasher. So these are totally dishwasher safe. They can also go in the microwave, they can go in the fridge, they can go in the freezer. So this I definitely recommend, and I'm just going to stick them back in their cupboard just to get them out of my way. So yes, absolutely, you want a good set of mixing bowls. You're going to want some dry ingredient measuring cups. I have quite a big set right here because I actually have all of them. None of them are in the dishwasher. Look at that. So I have everything from 1 cup right down to 1/8 of a cup. You do want ones that have thirds of a cup, at least 1/3 of a cup. I have a 1/3 and a 2/3. but at least a 1/3, because a lot of measuring sets do not come with a third. So the ones you definitely want are the 1 cup, the 1/2 cup, the 1/3, the 1/4, and the 1/8. If you don't have a 3/4 and a 2/3, that's okay, because you can just double up a couple of these ones. That's fine. But you do want a decent set of measuring cups. You also need a liquid measuring cup. You've seen this one. I use a 2-cupper. I like this one. This is my favorite. It's obviously had a lot of use. It's quite worn. Some of the numbers are coming off. That's fine. I love this one. So you should get yourself a good liquid measuring cup. You cannot measure liquid ingredients in the dry measuring cup, and you shouldn't measure dry ingredients in your liquid measuring cup. So you do need both. You can get a set of these if you want. I just have one because I don't need more than 2 cups typically at a time. I also have my measuring spoons. You rarely see these in a video. Sometimes, rarely, you'll see my Mickey Mouse ones, but these I usually use just to separate my ingredients before I start recording. These actually, I'm missing a couple because they're in the dishwasher. There are 2 more that go on here. But these ones match my measuring cups. You'll notice they're actually identical. They have coordinating colors. And I love having these ones because, just like the measuring cups, they actually have the measurements engraved on them. I prefer that to printed. That means you can put them in the dishwasher and you don't have to worry about your numbers, your measurements coming off. So if you are going to get measuring cups and measuring spoons, if you can get ones that are engraved, that is actually for the best, because then they don't wear off in the dishwasher. So definitely a good set of measuring spoons. Something else you might want to get. You've seen this in a lot of videos. This is actually a dough scraper. It's a metal dough scraper. I don't use it to scrape dough so much. You can. Like, I could scrape my dough up off my mat or off a cutting board if it's sticking. No problem. I have done that. But I often use this just to push and separate my dough. So get yourself a dough scraper. That is a really useful tool. This is another dough scraper. This is a plastic one. You don't see this in too many videos. I think you've seen it maybe once if you've watched all my video. But this is a plastic one with a curve. It's a bowl scraper. This is to scrape the dough out of your bowls. It's really helpful with starters like sourdough starters that are quite wet. So yeah, a curved plastic bowl scraper is really handy. So I also use that a lot. You're going to want bread pans. If you're going to make a lot of bread, you need some bread pans. All right. I have multiple bread pans. I have silicone ones that you've seen me use most of the time because these are my favorite. I have glass ones. I have metal ones. My absolute favorite is the silicone, but there is definitely a place for all of them. There are some doughs that I will only bake in glass. It depends on the dough. So you do want a selection if you're going to bake a lot. Silicone's my favorite because it is non-stick, and I still spray it a little bit with a little bit of cooking spray just to make sure it's not going to stick. But it is non-stick. I've never had anything stick in silicone. The glass has more stability because you'll notice silicone, if you have a dough that's really wet. Now this one's pretty good because it has these braces, so it can't really push out too much on the sides. But a lot of times silicone pans will bow outward. So if you are getting silicone, look for these little wings that brace the sides. But if you need stability in a dough, you need it not to bow out on the edges, then you definitely want to use glass or even metal. So it's good to have a selection of pans for when you need different things. Something else you might want. This is definitely not required, but I really like having this. This is actually for making pies. This is just a wheel. It's just plastic, but it's really sharp plastic, so I can cut through my dough. This is nice if I need to make strips or anything like that, or any quick little shapes where I just need a straight line. This is really, really handy. So if you can get one of these, sometimes they come in pie making kits, but I use these quite a bit. This is really, really handy for me. You've seen this a lot. This is my bread lame. It's good to get one that has a little cover, and it's really good to get one that has replaceable blades. I have a little package here of replaceable blades, so whenever this blade dulls, I can just throw it out and replace it. So it's really nice to have that. And you do want one with a cover. You do want one that curves a little bit. So you notice this blade has a little bit of a curve to it. That actually helps you draw your gashes on your bread. So a bread lame is really important. So I do recommend people get a bread lame if you're going to do a lot of baking. Rolling pin. You actually don't use a rolling pin a ton when you're baking bread because a lot of time you're just forming it. But if you do make a lot of things like your bagels or your cinnamon buns or your donuts, you might want to invest in one of these. I recommend this kind. First of all, it's metal and really easy to clean. So you just literally wipe it off. I don't put it in the dishwasher or anything. I don't have to do anything. I just clean it right off. It's really easy. You can take these ends off. And this has different sized rings to raise or lower your rolling pin so that you know exactly what the thickness is. Now I could just put this back on or keep this off and it would just be a normal rolling pin. But these rings are really, really handy. So I have one that's 3/8 of an inch. I have one that's a 1/4 inch. I have one that's 1/8 of an inch, and I have the little bitty one that's a 1/16 of an inch. These are really, really handy. So it has it on both ends, so you just put as many rings on as you want, and then you screw this back in. And that controls how deep your dough is going to be. So if you need to roll a really thin dough, you can use that 1/16 of an inch and pass this over, and it'll keep your dough at a consistent thickness. If you're going to get a rolling pin for rolling out dough, especially bread dough like bagels and donuts and stuff, I would definitely recommend this kind because it gives you a lot of control over the thickness. So yes, definitely get that. That's a basting brush. You're going to want a few of these. I have a lot. But basting brushes are really, really important. You can use them to spread egg washes. You can use them to spread melted butter. You can use them to spread milk or any other thing you're brushing onto your breads. You definitely want to get at least a few of these. I have quite a few because they're often all over the place. They're in the dishwasher. I use them all the time. If I'm baking 4 loaves of bread, I'm usually using between 4 and 6 basting brushes that day. So basting brushes. I prefer the silicone ones. I don't like the ones with the hairs because 1, the hairs come out. But 2, the silicone you're just spreading things like egg white and stuff like that. This is really easy. So I really recommend the silicone basting brushes. Little bitty knife. You've seen that in a few. I just like having a really small knife just to get my butters and my margarines, whatever you're using. This is just really handy for that because it's nice and small. You don't need to use a big knife. This is actually a kid's knife. It's actually a Gerber knife from when my kids were little, their little utensil sets. You can buy these in the baby section. I really recommend getting a nice small little knife. They're really, really handy. You've seen these before. These are I actually have 6 of them, but I only have the other 3 are in the dishwasher, so I only have 3 right now. These are my little tiny measuring bowls. I like these for salt, sugar, spices, things like that. You don't have to use these. You can just measure directly out of your containers and put them directly in your pans. But I really do like having these because it allows me to have my ingredients ready to go. Not just for filming, but if I have something where right now I have to add a teaspoon of cinnamon, I don't really want to have to wait to measure it out. If you have something that's really time specific, add it now. Or if you're going to be kneading a dough and your hands are going to be full of dough, you don't necessarily want to be mucking with a container and a measuring spoon. It's really a lot easier just to have that sitting off to the side, grab it, dump, put it down. Okay, less dishes to get dough off of. So I really recommend these little tiny bowls. You haven't seen these yet. You will, I promise. These are proofing baskets. Now I have 2 of them. I actually have more than 2, but I'm just showing you 2. Mine have liners. Both of the liners come off, but I thought I would take 1 liner off and leave 1 in for you. You can put your dough to rise in here. Doughs that, like a sourdough or pretty much any dough you want to have that shape, as long as they're not a super wet dough. Ciabatta doesn't go well in here because it really sticks. You can still do it, but you just have to flour the heck out of these. Now you get these, they are handmade most of the time. They have a really nice pattern. So you put your dough in here face down, so top down. You have your nasty end up. Okay, so then when you invert this onto a baking pan and take this off, you have this fancy pattern. So your dough ends up having this pattern on it, and it's really quite pretty. So these are really neat. They wick moisture away, so something like a sourdough that does have more moisture content, they help pull the moisture out of the dough. So these are really, really useful. They come in different sizes and different shapes. I have a couple of oval ones and I have a couple of bigger ones. You can also use them with the liner in, so that'll mean your dough top is smoother instead of having the ridges, and that's fine. It doesn't really matter. You can do whichever you want. You just make sure you flour your liner and your basket. depending on what you're using, so that your dough doesn't stick. You do want to flour them. And if I'm using one without the liner, I actually take the liner afterward and I just pop the liner over top, just to, one, not lose the liner while the dough is rising, but just, as a cover. So you can do that easily. The other thing that goes with these, move that one, it doesn't have to look like this. You just need a brush, a stiff brush. This is very stiff, to clean these after, because you can't put these in the dishwasher. Absolutely cannot. So to clean these, you literally, after everything is dry, you don't try to clean it if you have little bits of wet dough. You let that dough dry. So you set it aside for a few hours, let everything dry. Then you just take this and you just scrape all the dough and all the remnants off. Then you dump that in the garbage. Keep your bowl again. Do it a second time just to get any extra residue. Again, dump that. Then what you do is you just set this aside, and you don't want to get this wet is the thing. So you just set it aside in a cupboard. You just leave it. You don't want to lock it in any kind of container because you still want it to be exposed to the air all the time. So then you just take this, stick it in your cupboard. The liners you can wash in your washing machine, just don't put them in the dryer. Okay, gentle cycle in the washing machine if you need to wash them. And then you just hang them to dry. They don't take long to dry. They're just a canvas. They're not complicated. It doesn't take long to dry at all. Then you can just put your liner back in like that whenever you need to. Now, if you've been using your liner, you probably don't need to clean the basket too much because the liner catches everything. But either way, it doesn't matter. You can use them with the liner, without the liner. Just make sure you have a brush to clean them. You haven't seen this yet. You will in my sourdough video that is going to be coming out. We're in the middle of making sourdough. It takes about a week. So you haven't seen this yet. This is for whisking your sourdough. This is a Danish bread whisk. You absolutely want one if you're going to make a lot of sourdoughs, because there's nothing quite like this for getting that sourdough mixed, and it doesn't really stick, and it's really easy to clean. All you have to do is rinse it while the dough is still wet on here, and it doesn't really stick very much anyway. It comes out fairly clean just because of the kind of metal and because of the shape. So this helps you mix your sourdough starter, because you have to mix your dough when you're starting your starter without getting all the air out, because you don't want to kill the air bubbles all completely. You want to break them up a little bit, but you don't want to kill them. So this is much better than a regular whisk, and it's certainly better than your hands for beating up your sourdough starter. So if you're going to make a lot of sourdough, get yourself a Danish bread whisk. It's really, really handy. These, you only need these if you're going to make donuts or bagels. I have them in two sizes. I have a standard large size and I have the small mini donut size. If you're going to make donuts or bagels, yeast donuts anyway, because you can make cake donuts, but if you're going to make yeast donuts, you definitely want to get yourself some donut cutters. There's really nothing like them. It is so much easier to use the cutters to make your donuts and your bagels. You can make a mini bagel with this, standard side bagel with that. There's nothing quite like them for cutting out your bagels and your donuts. It's just so much faster, so much easier. They look so much better than when you're trying to do it by hand. So if you're going to make a lot of bagels and donuts, I would invest in a couple of these. If you're not going to make a lot of donuts and bagels, if you're only going to do them occasionally, I wouldn't bother, because you can just do it by hand. It's not that big a deal. So the final thing I'm going to show you is something that is entirely for fun. And I'm just putting this plastic down so that you can't, this little piece of orange plastic down so you can see, because these are stencils. And if I just put them on here, you can't really see. So these are actually stencils. You haven't seen me use these yet, but you will. My sourdough bread recipe will be coming out in about a week, and you will see me use at least one of these. So these stencils are for use on your bread. So your sourdough bread, let's assume you've used your Banneton, your proofing basket, to make your sourdough bread. So you have these cute little stencils. I have all kinds. I have, this says made with love. That's a bunny rabbit. This is wheat. And I'll just show you one more. This is happiness is homemade. I have a lot. And I have smaller stencils as well. They're identical, they're just smaller. So what you do is you take your stencil, let's assume this is your bread, you put a little bit of water, like just using your basting brush. You would just take your basting brush, dip it in water, and just brush a very little bit of water across the top where your stencil is going to go. You don't want your stencil to stick, but you also need the flour to stick. Then you put your stencil on. You put your stencil on your bread, give it a bit of a press, not too much, you don't want to collapse your dough. So you give it a bit of a press, then you sprinkle some, if you're using a lighter colored dough, you would use cocoa powder. Sprinkle just a little bit of cocoa powder to make that mark. You'll see me do that. If it's a darker dough, you want to sprinkle a little bit of just regular white flour. So then you will have that after it bakes. You do that before it bakes, then you bake it, you get these cute little stencils. These are entirely for fun. You don't need them. Okay, these stencils are absolutely just for fun. You don't require them. They're entertaining. And you can get them off of Amazon. You can get them at your local, if you have a bakery supply store, they should have them. But, I mean, mine came with, I just bought one set because they're fun. So I've got like chickens, I've got birds, I've got all kinds of things. That's a bee. This one's acorns, hearts. You know, they're just good, clean fun. You don't have to get these. These are just something I recommend if you want to have a little bit of fun with your baking because they're very entertaining. Anyway, that's about it for the supplies that you require for baking, for making breads. And I hope you've enjoyed joining me today and learning a little bit about the supplies that we might need as we bake our breads. We will do another baking tutorial tomorrow. I just wanted to answer the question and make the video that somebody asked me to make because they just wanted to know what you might need if you're really going to get into baking bread. There's a lot of other things you can also get, a lot of other things I have. These are just the things I would recommend if you're going to get started in baking a lot of bread. But that's about it for today. Join us again tomorrow. If you are enjoying these videos, don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow.